exploration will be led by R. Alan Brooks, who is many things, including an artist in the Cowboy exhibition. Alan teaches graphic novel writing for Regis University's MFA program and also at Lighthouse Writers Workshop. He's the author of The Burning Metronome and Anguish Garden, which are graphic novels featuring a social commentary. His award-winning weekly comic for the Colorado Sun, What I Miss, has been praised for its direct engagement with social issues, and his TED Talk on the importance of art reached 1 million views in 2 months. He hosts MCA Denver's podcast, How Art is Born, and his graphic novel on Dearfield is included in the Cowboy exhibition that I've been mentioning, that you all have seen. So please join me in welcoming R. Alan Brooks.
Hello. Hello. So listen, we're a small, intimate group, so I'm gonna know if any of you are not saying hello back. The beauty of an event like this is that we get to create an experience together. And so there are gonna be 2 times that I need you guys to cheer. This means that I'm gonna introduce people. I'm gonna introduce them and we're gonna cheer. So I'm just gonna do a test run. I'm gonna announce somebody who's fictional, and then we're gonna cheer for them. Are you with me on that? Yes? All right. Coming to the stage, Donald Duck! That is beautiful. So I'm only asking you to do that 2 times. So listen, my name is R. Alan Brooks. You can call me Alan. The only reason I use my first initial is so that I can be Googleable. Alan and Brooks are very common. And even with the Google alerts, I get all kinds of news stories about people who are not me. So, I want to tell you about my dad really quick. He was born in 1954. He just turned 70 years old. Now, right on. Now, in the 60s, when he was around 10 years old, he liked comic books, but he could not find any comic books with Black characters. After some searching, as I said, he was around 10 years old, he finally found a comic book that had a Black character. It was Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos. It was a war comic, and I know the people who watch Marvel movies might be confused because Nick Fury's Black in those movies, but in those old comics, he was a white dude with an eye patch. And the only Black character that my father could find was a supporting character in Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos. Now, when that character premiered, the company that did the printing of the comic, they were confused. They were like, it can't possibly be an intention to have a Black character here. So they changed the skin color of the character back to white, even though the art wasn't like that. So in his first appearance, that character was a white character. This was in the 1960s. Now, me, 60 years later, standing on this stage with all of you, because of a comic book that I wrote and drew about a Black Colorado town. It's honoring my father. It's honoring what he didn't have as a child, and it's honoring all that he gave me as a child. So this is a meaningful thing to be in this discussion about Black Cowboys and all the history surrounding it. I want to thank you guys for being here. Please give yourselves a round of applause for coming. Okay, so remember I said that we are all creating this experience, right? So we all have to be vocal at the moments where it's appropriate to be vocal. Just so that you know what's gonna happen, we're gonna have the presentations, as Sarah mentioned. We'll have Q&A at the end, so there'll be a time for you to ask your questions. I'll tell you now, it's a good idea to think of what your question is, distill it down to 1 sentence, and then ask it. That way we can make sure we have room for everybody's questions. And I'll say that again. We're going to steal a little bit from This American Life tonight and break everything into sections. How many people listen to This American Life? Yeah. Okay, so I've been working on an Ira Glass impression. The people at the MCA tell me it's really good. Are you ready for it? Okay, here it comes. Welcome to This American Life. I'm Ira Glass. Oh, it's not that good, is it? It's not that good. You guys have to pretend like it's good. Okay, so this is beginning Act 1. Act 1 of our program. I'm about to bring Bob up. I'm going to say he has a whole bunch of difficult things to pronounce in his bio, and I think he did it on purpose. I think he just edited it for me so that I would have to say hard things. So I might skip some of them. Bob Brunswick, PhD, University of Colorado, is a professor emeritus and research fellow at the University of Northern Colorado. He's conducted archaeological research in the Southern Rockies, northeastern Colorado Plains, Pakistan, the Arabian Gulf, France, and Poland for the past half-century. Bob was Rost, European Union, visiting professor at Nicholas Copernicus University in Torun, Poland in 2014, a Fulbright scholar at Krakow's Jagiellonian University in 2014 and 2016, 2017. And he's a UNC Distinguished Scholar. It's a different UNC. He directs archaeological excavations and manages building restoration projects at the historic African-American Dearfield town site. Here's the first time that I'm asking you guys to give a big round of applause. Give it up for Bob!
Well, thanks, Alan. And I did put Polish names in there just for you. Couple of things about, can we bring up the presentation, please? I'm going to give you some background on Dearfield. I've been associated with work at Dearfield for the past 15 years. And we've moved from, in 2008, in trying to protect what was left of the Dearfield town site, which is about 24 miles east of Greeley. Buildings were beginning to fall down. There was a lot of vandalism taking place. And it was kind of a sad situation. In the last 15 years, we've been able to protect the two standing buildings that are there. We've done 6 years of excavations, being able to recover a lot of cool information about the town site. And we're now in the process of converting, restoring two of the two standing buildings at Dearfield. Within the next probably 6 to 8 years, they will become the core of a National Historic Site under the joint administration of the Black American West Museum and the National Park Service. So it's going to be a very cool thing. And it's going to be a win as far as we're concerned. Cowboys. I grew up on a farm in western Kansas. And as a farm kid, as a ranch kid, I spent a lot of time on horses. I wasn't really a cowboy until pretty late in my teenage years. I was a sheep boy. because my father decided that we were going to run sheep. When I was getting ready to go to college, within a couple of years before I left for Kansas State University, what he decided to do was buy cattle because they were a whole lot easier. And if he didn't have me around to work with the sheep, it wasn't worth the effort. So I would have been a cowboy a lot sooner, but, things happen. What you're looking at here is a satellite image of the colony, and it is a colony. It's not just the town site, but it's a fairly large colony that was established in 1910 by Oliver Toussaint Jackson. And the little boxes that you see in red are homesteads. And this is one of the reasons that Dearfield existed, is because there was still government homestead land available in that little area. And so people were able to spend 3 years improving the property. And then at the end of that, if they built a small house, maybe a small building of some other type, they were able to get the land for free. And there were two ways they could do it. There was the Desert Homestead Act, which was passed fairly late, and the original 1862 Homestead Act, which allowed you to get 160 acres, but you could get 320 acres on the Desert Act. And the Desert Act was passed because there were certain areas where there wasn't enough rainfall or enough water to be able to support decent farms. And so the federal government and Congress decided that we could go with 320 acres. So some of these are 320 acre patches, some of them are 160 acre patches. Dearfield is in the upper left-hand corner. And then the red. And then down here in the green is another small town. And most people don't know this, but the Dearfield Farm Colony had a second town called Chapelton. Chapelton developed a little bit later than the town of Dearfield. And one of the things that happened, you probably can't tell here by looking at the dates on these homesteads, but the homesteading first took place generally in the northwest corner where Dearfield was located. And then as people came and continued to settle, it moved down towards the southeast. And Chapelton basically became a very small town about 1912, 1914, a few years after Dearfield was established. So early growth, 1910 to 1917. Later growth, 1918 through 1921, and that's where all the homesteads kind of moved from the northwest to the southeast. And then by the 1920s, between 1922 and 1930, Dearfield was very successful early on, but between 1922 and 1930, it began to fade. And it began to fade for a number of reasons. First, Dearfield was established as a place where in the early teens, there was more rainfall than there is today. It was just one of those periods of climate, the climate anomaly. And so they were able to grow really nice crops, be very successful for a period of about 12 years. And then rainfall began to decrease. And of course, you know what happened in 1930, 1931, 1929. Nationally, we had the Dust Bowl. Nationally, we had a lot of economic disaster with the Depression. This is the founder, Oliver Toussaint Jackson. In this case, he's sitting at a desk in the governor's office in Denver, in here. And that was one of his jobs. This is the town of Dearfield as it exists today. And there were far more buildings there in 1910 through 1920, 1930 than there are today. But these are historic photographs of some of the buildings at Dearfield. The service station, 1917, we're restoring that right now. It'll be a visitor center for the National Park Service facility. The Dearfield Lodge below it, this is on the left-hand side. That's the Jackson House. That's still intact. And we're restoring it now to what it looked like in about 1920. There was a church. There were a couple of stores. There was a blacksmith, and his house is still not standing, but it's still there. And the blacksmith shop is located near the service station, which is near US 34. And then another commercial property that O.T. Jackson developed was a Dearfield lunchroom. It was built in 1917 on the far upper left. So these buildings are either on the ground or standing today, and we're going to be restoring some of them over the next 10 years or so. Okay, one of the things about Dearfield is that it is a very sandy area. It's part of a dune field that was created with sand blowing out of the South Platte River on the north into the hills and the valleys on the south. At the end of the last ice age, when there was a lot of wind and there wasn't much ground cover. And so those dune fields built up, and that sandy soil is what you have to work with today. It's not the richest soil in the world, but when you put water to it, it can be very productive. And so Dearfield, the colony of Dearfield, the area that the colony exists in, has mainly farmland on the northern part, which you can see here in the white. It's mixed with grassland patches. There are areas where you can't farm very easily, and other areas you can. And then as you head further to the south, you end up in an area where farming becomes more difficult because it gets a little hillier, and also the sand and the vegetation is such that it's almost impossible to farm in most areas. What this means is you had an area of the colony that was farmland, mainly farmland in the north, and in the south it had mainly ranch territory where you had grasses, where you couldn't grow a whole lot, but you could pasture cattle. This is a picture of a satellite picture or aerial picture of the northern part. You can see some edges where there are farms today. And then you can see kind of the sagebrush area in the south. So ranch in the south, ranches mainly in the south, small ranches, and farms in the north. And so cowboy culture in Dearfield was a practical thing, and it was in most of the West anyway. It wasn't as romantic sometimes as we like to think. It was a part of daily life. It was based on farm and ranching operations that were small, between 100 and 30 acres of shortgrass prairie in some cases, and maybe some cropland. There were cattle, small horse herds, because horses were very important at that point in time in Dearfield history. Cattle ranching had small breeding herds, maybe 10 to 50 animals at the most, and they produced milk products, meat, leather, and stuff like this that were sold, that were consumed locally, but they were also sold in some of the towns and in the Denver area. Grass forage was always in short supply because this is shortgrass prairie. And shortgrass prairie means that even though you've got maybe better than average rainfall during the time of Dearfield, you still can't overgraze it because you'll use the grass up. So there's a limit to how many cattle you can graze on this. And they did have haying operations, which you can see on the lower left-hand corner, horse-drawn haying, milking, branding cattle, and just riding the range. So, cowboy life was definitely the cowboy life that we like to think of, in the Old West. Not too many cattle herds going through this. And so raising and using horses and mules, you've got a mule team here running a buckboard here in the center. That was really the heartland, the heart part of Dearfield farm and life. Horses early on in the Dearfield era were essential for transportation. They had buggies and wagons and so forth to get people around, and then plowing, haying, harvesting, hauling supplies and everything were all done by horses. The other thing that horses were really important for, and cowboying skills were really important for, were annual Dearfield fairs, where they had horse races and bulldogging and all kinds of rodeo events that were based in the colony of Dearfield. It was only pretty late in the colony history that automobiles began to come in, and horses were gradually replaced, probably in the early 1920s, mid-1920s, by cars, trucks, and tractors. But horses were always in use in the Dearfield. To give you an idea, just a very quick insight into one of the cowboys of Dearfield, Charlie Rothwell, 1895 to 1979, pretty close up to the present. His life as a Dearfield cowboy is really a good example of what a lot of the young men had at the time. He was one of the earliest homesteaders with his mother Haiti. He moved to Dearfield in 1910 at the very beginning. He was age 15. He operated the farm all by himself between the ages of 17 and 19, between 1912 and 1914. He wrangled in cattle drives from New Mexico, Texas, Utah, and you may not have known this, but there were cattle drives still going on in the early 20th century. They were small cattle drives, and they were moving them from different parts of the West to other parts of the West. They weren't necessarily bringing them in to send them back to Kansas City for slaughter or anything like that. They were being used to populate a lot of the ranches that began to grow up in the Eastern Plains. He bronc busted wild horses. He did that with a lot of neighboring ranchers in the Dearfield area. That's how he made some money, and that was hard work. He competed professionally in calf roping and bronc riding in not only the Dearfield fairs, but also at Cheyenne Frontier Days, which was unusual at the time because there weren't very many black cowboys participating in a lot of the major rodeo events at the time. As a matter of fact, when he competed in Cheyenne Frontier Days, one of the white ranchers in the area paid all of his entry fees and everything. He thought that much of Charlie as a wonderful a horse person, a cowboy, and a young man. Along with 5 other Dearfield young men, he served in the army during World War I. He didn't go to France, but he served throughout the war. I think he had a service of about 3 years. And then later on, from 1922 to 1950, he worked as so many African American men did at that point in time. He worked for the railroads as a pullman, and that was one of the few jobs that was really available to them early on. And you see pictures of Charlie here as a young man on the far left, as a soldier, an army soldier next to that, doing a rope trick, at his farm in Dearfield. And it's kind of hard to see, but there's actually a big loop of rope in that one. And then Charlie, at age probably about 77, 78, in the left-hand corner. He was a wonderful man, and as a matter of fact, you might be interested to know that the Black American West Museum sent his boots and I believe a hat back to the National African American Museum in Washington, D.C., part of the Smithsonian system, and it's part of a display of Black Cowboys in that museum. So that's my part of the program. It gives you a little background about Dearfield and Cowboys. And next. Coordinated.
It's a well-oiled machine. So, for all of you that don't know, the comic that I did as part of the show is a comic about Dearfield, and it's in 7 frames. I think it's 7 pages. So, I got to say, I mentioned my father at the top of the show. He always made sure that I knew Black history. Growing up in Atlanta, which is a predominantly Black city, and it amazes me how much I know and how much I don't know. Like all these pockets of history that have been suppressed or erased or denied or burned to the ground. And I say that to bring us to, I had never heard of Dearfield, Colorado until I was asked to create art for this show. So I'd be interested in hearing how you first encountered the story of Dearfield.
Well, one thing about Dearfield that I became very attracted to at the very beginning is I grew up, like I said, in western Kansas as a farm kid. And this was in the 50s, so it was a bit after the heyday of Dearfield. But we also lived on my grandfather's ranch, and lived in his house, a leaky old house that was built about 1920. And I lived the same kind of life that the people in Dearfield lived. And that's something about the area of Dearfield that became very apparent to us as we began to do more and more research and try to bring back, some of the traditions and the understanding of the history of Dearfield. Is that the people at Dearfield were there, the African Americans were there because they needed a better life. They thirsted for a better life. And the one way that that could happen was to own their own land. And they followed Booker T. Washington, that you work your way up through your own efforts. And you create opportunities for the next generation in the same way. You don't rely on outsiders to do anything. You work it as a community. And Dearfield was a community. It was a very important community. It had 3 churches. And those churches were absolutely essential in the colony life. One of the things that was unusual about Dearfield is that it was established by O.T. Jackson, who actually was a successful businessman. And so he gave a lot of people a sense that success was possible. He ran hotels in the Boulder area. He ran restaurants. He ran a small resort, and he sold all of that to found Dearfield, and moved there. And he homesteaded some land, and he bought some land to create the town site. And he kind of had a vision. But the other thing about O.T. Jackson at that time was that he had just become a messenger for the governor of Colorado, which was probably, at the time, was probably the highest that an African-American man could achieve. And a messenger is not just someone who carries messages. A messenger in the governor's office was someone who carried knowledge and information as well as documents to the legislature, to the various departments of state and so forth like that. And he was a very trusted individual. He worked for 7 different Democrat governors, which is the other thing that was unusual because O.T. Jackson was a Democrat. And most African Americans of the day were Republicans. They were still members of the party of Lincoln. And so he was kind of swimming upstream on that one. But he was able to use his connections with the State House to better the lives of the people that he began to recruit to Dearfield. And so we have a whole series of things that came together for a period of about 15 to 17 years. That is an absolutely amazing achievement by these people.
You know, one of the things that stood out to me as I started to research the story of Dearfield, Black American heritage in this country is so plagued by treacherous endings, you know, like towns being bombed, burned down, Klan members murdering, you know. So many times when Black Americans have tried to be enterprising in this country, it's ended in such horrible disaster through no fault of the Black people who were creating these things. And in this particular town, I didn't see any disastrous ending. You know, like it was like the Dust Bowl happened, the Great Depression, the things that you were talking about regarding farming and how climate changes and that kind of stuff. That really stood out to me, and I got to say, in your presentation just now, those were really interesting aspects.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of the things that you need to keep in mind too is that Dearfield, particularly the last half of Dearfield, existed during the rise of a scourge of Colorado, and that's the Ku Klux Klan, and it was a very nasty, very violent time. Dearfield itself does not seem to have been touched, although places like Greeley were hotbeds of Ku Klux Klan activity. What is interesting is that there was only one governor, a Republican, during which O.T. Jackson was not in the State House as a messenger, and that Republican governor was the Klan leader for the state. It's ironic history.
Right. Okay, so you mentioned plans to work on a museum specifically for Dearfield. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, sure. So there are many things that have come together. We started out in 2008. We, meaning there are a group of folks in Greeley who were working with the Black American West Museum. Since then, we've become board members and we basically were advisory and so forth. But we basically run the Dearfield Dream Project, which started out ended up in 2012. That first came about. And initially what we were trying to do was just try to keep the site from falling apart. I mean, it was already in poor condition. A lot of the buildings had already collapsed. And so we were doing the best we could to try to keep those buildings stable, try to protect them from vandals. This is on a pretty substantial highway, US 34. A lot of traffic there and a lot of vandalism was taking place. Over a period of years, we were able to protect the buildings, to be able to put chain link fence around some of the ones that were still standing. And then we began a process of rehabilitating the buildings. And about 2.5 years ago, we had members of Congress who decided that these congressional members decided that having been successful in the Amache site and creating the National Historic Site under the Park Service there, that they wanted to turn their attention to Dearfield. And we had similar thoughts at the same time, so we basically converged on that idea. Federal legislation went in about almost 2 years ago in Congress, worked its way through the House, and then eventually through the Senate also. And the Dearfield Study Act was passed and enacted into law at the end of December last year. That means that what's going to happen to Dearfield is that it's going to go through a special study with the National Park Service, which has actually just started this month. We're going to be meeting online with a special study team under the Park Service twice during November. And they're going to determine whether to recommend that Dearfield become a National Historic Site, which is kind of cool. In the meantime, what we've been doing is trying to restore the two standing buildings, the Jackson House and the filling station, and been getting grants to do that. And very slowly, we've been kind of pulling them back together, stabilizing the buildings, putting new foundations under the filling station, putting new roofs on it, everything like that. And so we're going to have a visitor center before this is over. The Jackson House is going to be turned into a house museum that people can walk through and, see the rooms as they were in, 1920 and so forth. So Dearfield will come alive again. And we'll continue to do archaeological research out there and try to pull as much information as we can away from the land. And then there's a lot of genealogy work going on among Dearfield families. Right now we have about 30 different families that have genealogies that tell them about their backgrounds, where they came from, where their descendants. We're trying to track down their descendants. And then we have a lot of documentation, historic photographs and things that have just begun to spring up as Dearfield becomes more and more popular, as people begin to learn more about it. People say, well, I've got this diary, or I have these documents, or I have these photographs from my great-great-grandparents who lived at Dearfield or knew somebody at Dearfield, and we're beginning to accumulate those at the University of Northern Colorado, at the Greeley Museums, places like that, at the Black American West Museum. And so we're getting all of that lost knowledge and lost information back again. And that's really exciting. There are going to be many generations of young people that are going to be working on Dearfield history and Dearfield archaeology and the whole 9 yards.
That's really cool. I don't know if you guys heard in the bio and just now the mention that Bob's work is in archaeology. He's basically Indiana Jones. I know you can tell by looking at him here. Can you give it up for Bob, please? Thank you, guys. Yes, he'll be back up. Thank you, sir. How you guys doing? Are you good? Yes? Okay, this is the second time that you have to cheer really big, but I have to get through the bio. But are you ready to cheer really big? Yes? Right on. All right. Let's see here. All right. Amanda Hunt is the head of public engagement at the Walker, head of public engagement, learning, and impact at the Walker. She was previously at the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art in Los Angeles, where she served as director of public programs and creative practice until 2022. Hunt was also the director of education and public programs at the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, co-curator of the 2019 Desert X Biennial, associate curator at the Studio Museum in Harlem, and curator at the Los Angeles-based nonprofit LAX Art, LAX Art. I don't know, one or the other. Can you guys give it up for Amanda Hunt, please? Yeah! Yeah!
Hello, hi. I feel like I needed to run up on stage with that kind of introduction. Thank you. I was going to say I'm going to tell everyone a story, but I realized presentations are just stories in a way. My story is a bit different, and before I get into it, I just want to say thank you to Nora and for Sarah for this invitation to come to Colorado for the first time, but to also, I know, yeah, I'm very excited. Thank you for having me. This was an exhibition that I made because I had to. And I just appreciate you both so much for understanding that and for finding inspiration in it for yourselves, but also to carry it forward in a place that also appreciates it and can continue to learn and grow from all kinds of histories. So I grew up in Philadelphia, and when I was 16, I was sitting in Fairmount Park, which is a large city park system. And I was waiting for a friend, I think on a blanket, in just a little field off the Schuylkill River. And I saw a young black kid in a wife beater on a horse emerge out of a grassy knoll. And I thought I was having a vision. It was gorgeous and it was impossible, and I had never seen anything like it. And so that was burned into my brain. Fast forward, I'm working in Harlem at the Studio Museum in Harlem, which was founded in 1969 to support artists of African descent and the diaspora. It's still going today. It's an incredible place if you've never been. Please go on your next visit to the city. And in my time there, I took the subway, as one often does in the city. And there was one night that I was going home on the 3 train. We were the last stop in Harlem on the 3 train. And it was pretty late, and it was pretty quiet. And I looked up, and I saw this gorgeous older man who looked like Melvin Van Peebles. And I was like, "Excuse me, sir, are you a Black Cowboy?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." And I was like a kid on Christmas. I just couldn't believe it was happening again in the middle of New York City. And he walked out, I mean, like truly such a cool looking guy. And on the back of his beautiful silk bomber jacket was Federation of Black Cowboys. This was the man that I saw on the train. I mean, he does not disappoint. So that's Mountain Man Ellis Harris, photographed by a Village Voice photographer and freelance photographer Brad Trent. So the year's 2016. I knew my time in New York was coming to a close. Normally at museums, you take years to prepare exhibitions so that you can apply a scholarly level of research, as Bob has in his career and his work. But I knew that I had a small window and that this had to be my last show there. So it came together quickly and really beautifully, and from an artist community that is still very much present in my life today. So this was one of the works on view in the space. I called the show Black Cowboy. This is a beautiful image by Philadelphia-based photographer Ron Tarver, who still teaches, I believe, at Temple there. He was a photographer for the Philadelphia Inquirer for over 20 years, documenting Black Cowboys in Philadelphia with no traction. Alan and I will get into some crossover in our conversation later there. And this is an image of a black cowboy in 1992 or 3 in North Philadelphia. So that was one of the images in the show. This is the splash page on the website. So Black Cowboy came out of the title, very simple, very straightforward, is an homage to an exhibition in 1995 by my then boss, Thelma Golden, who's the director of the Studio Museum in Harlem. She's a formidable figure, just some of the best to cross paths with and have the pleasure and honor of working with. And this was her breakout show at the Whitney Museum a long time ago. And so Black Cowboy was to honor black male, because black male was about imaging black men with layers, with nuance, with sensitivity, with humor. And it is referenced over and over today in classrooms and certainly in curatorial circles, and it's something that people look back on. So I knew it wouldn't be quite black male, but I wanted to honor that history and continue that line of thinking of looking at people of color expansively. So for me, growing up, the cowboy was the Marlboro Man. It was John Wayne. Also in my research for images that I wanted to really communicate this level of how the cowboy stayed in one's mind and one's images. This was up on Sunset Boulevard for 20 years. Unbelievable. So just this was what was the imagination. That was kind of the extent of how you imagined the wild American West. But in fact, historians estimated that 1 in 4 cowboys in the 1850s through 1880s kind of period were in fact black. They were indigenous, and they were black. And that was something that, again, I knew I had to also give visual imagery and power to disrupt, but more so open up an icon of commercial culture in America and our idea of an ideal and pastoral past. We know it's a long and violent and complicated one, and it's also a colorful one, quite literally. It was inclusive of many kinds of people, the formation of this country as it exists today. Which, Bob, thank you for sharing more about what that meant specific to this place. So the show was quite modest. I was able to work with 7 or 8 artists in it. These are some more of those images by Brad Trent. You'll see Mountain Man kind of kicks the show off. This is from the spread of images in the Village Voice. And as I was starting to research the show, which was coming together pretty quickly, I was looking for photography and moving image to give a more contemporary sense of the cowboy and of the Black Cowboy. I know there are many historical images, some of which we've seen tonight, but I was interested in seeing if I could find basically Mountain Man represented in real time to a contemporary art audience in Harlem. And these images had just been made in the spring of 2016 as I was making the show and preparing it to open it at the end of 2016. So the timing was really interesting and beautiful, and I just cold called this guy, and he was like, yeah, how did you even come to connect this? Mama Kesha Morse, a beautiful woman. Like, these folks all came to the opening. It was truly a spectacular evening of that community coming together. The Federation of Black Cowboys has since shuttered. They were based in Queens, but all of the things that Bob detailed in Dearfield were happening and continue to happen across the country, whether it's Texas, California, New York State, Oklahoma. It's really a rich and varied and wide sense of community. These are some of Ron Tarver's images that I mentioned. Philadelphia, that's Concrete Canyon. On the far left, a really gorgeous image of a cowboy kind of slowly riding up Girard Avenue. Malcolm X pictured on the right, one of the murals that are iconic to Philadelphia, next to a horseman, a young boy playing basketball in that city context while his horse waits. These were real people, right? Living real lives in the city and also tending horses in those spaces. So I worked and found artists quickly. I remember Muhammad Burisa, whose installation is pictured here. Horse Day was this video installation that he made, an Algerian and French artist who came to Philadelphia and lived with the Fletcher Street Corral. This was a black-led and owned and operated space for cowboys and girls in the inner city, and he came to Philadelphia expressly to live with them, to document their lives there, and made a beautiful film. I would encourage you to look it up, and quickly got in touch with Muhammad after. I remember seeing an image in a magazine. So again, I want to give you a sense, this is happening in real time. I'm collecting images because also your job as a curator is to look all the time and constantly be seeking. And everything was coming together quickly to make this exhibition. Dina Lawson, who's Cowboys from 2014, which is hanging up at the MCA right now. It was so good to see it. It was like an old friend. Dina was just starting to explode, and all of the editions of this print were out on loan at other institutions. And she said, you know what, take my artist proof. Because the artists who I was contacting also wanted these images to be known and to be celebrated and put into space. So it was a really exciting just dialogue with people. Khalil Joseph's Wildcat, Aunt Janet from 2016. Again, guys, just looking through these images, I'm like, it was all happening in real time. That looks incredible at the museum as well. Congratulations. So the way that Khalil allowed me to do this, we didn't have this kind of space. It was that kind of basement, one room, like one shot to make it all work. Khalil allowed me to put the video on a flat screen monitor. There was some dirt on the floor, but these artists were working with me to make this happen. Chandra McCormick was another artist. This is an image of inmates at Angola State Prison, one of the largest examples of the prison industrial complex in Louisiana. You think of a rodeo, you think of horses, you think of freedom, you think of the frontier, you don't think of people in prison, imprisoned, presenting a rodeo as entertainment. So also the complexity of that American narrative intersecting in really striking ways. So to encapsulate what I wanted to do with the show, I won't read it all to you, but in some description that I wanted us to overcome as audience members, as individuals, the Marlboro Man, the John Wayne, and to begin expanding our thinking around who could embody the role of the cowboy, who had been tending to the land and to the animals over many generations, and who continued to, and continue to today in places like Colorado, of course, as well. And that those people also include women and children, right? And to really think about who's been able to symbolize our country's independence, and how we can get proud of these images too, of these people who've contributed to this long legacy of caretaking, and a narrative that's so iconic and personal, I think, to us all as Americans, that story is inclusive. What's been a joy since presenting that show in 2016 and 2017 is that immediately, subsequently, it felt like there was something in culture, there was something in the air, and every year, every few months, there was someone from Vogue contacting me for a quote. There was Idris Elba making a movie about the Fletcher Street Riding Club, pretty glamorous. Lil Nas X and Billy Ray Cyrus and Old Town Road. So I'm not claiming it all. It's always been there. But to see all of these images kind of exploding across popular culture and artistic and cinematic spaces, now into podcasts, it's been incredible. And every year I have the pleasure of receiving 3 or 4 emails from curious individuals like our friends Nora and Sarah saying, hey, you made the show about Black Cowboys in 2016. Can we talk about it? So that's the legacy. That's what I was able to contribute within my own means, within my own expertise and purview. And it's just been such a joy to share it with you all tonight. So thank you.
All right, give it up again, please, for Amanda. So Amanda, you're basically the OG of Black Cowboys and museums. Yeah. So we're going to do, Bob, please come up and join us again. We're going to do our conversation now. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk for a little bit, and then we're going to open it up for you guys' questions. And yeah, so hopefully we leave enough room for everything that you guys have to ask. I think...
Thank you.
Oh, that's nice of you to thank me in the microphone.
Would you like one, Bob?
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So it's interesting to engage with all of this material. You know, I think you showing that picture of the Marlboro Man, which certainly defines the American perception of what a cowboy is, and the idea that that billboard was up for 20 years. Like, I think about how much it's been branded upon people's minds. There's this, so, you know, my father's a big fan of like terrible movie serials from the 30s. But included in some of those serials are the Black Cowboy movies, which there was a whole, you know, dozens of them, featuring entirely black cast. And then just for every sort of, like, you know, I think Roy Rogers was like the singing cowboy, and so they were like the black singing cowboys, and a lot of those that iconography is interesting. And when I see like those posters from that time, particularly when I was younger, it was still surprising to me. You know, so yeah. Really cool that you were able to bring this black cowboy iconography forward in a way that resonated. Was there a thought?
No, just a reinforcement of like, wow, every time you see it, still, wow, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It leaves an impression, I think, like what gets reinforced, like the Marlboro Man that doesn't leave space for other stories, like, but they're out there, they exist. And so my reference point was that brand, right? And that framing of the cowboy. You have a different reference point. You probably have a different reference point, but like that we've all seen it in some capacity. Like that show is just about articulating it properly in a way of just saying, nope, it is here and it's here and maybe it's there too.
It was really great to hear you talk about feeling the legacy that you were able to contribute with your show. Bob, in your work with the Black American West Museum and the upcoming Dearfield Museum, do you have a vision of kind of like what legacy you want to contribute to people who come to see those things?
Well, I think the legacy that is emerging out of Dearfield and Bowley and Blackton and so many other black settlements in the West is what happened, what came out of the Civil War and how long it took, and it's still taking, for African Americans to be part of the fabric of this country. And that's extraordinarily important. And that desire to create a viable, enriching life is there. And I think that's what comes out of Dearfield, is people loving and working together, And most important of all was trying to create a future for their children and their grandchildren. And I think we all think about that. Those of us that have children, I know Amanda is in an early stage of that. I'm in a late stage of that. My children are in their early 40s, and we try to build those lives outward. And that's what Dearfield and so many other communities in the late 19th century and early 20th century. That's what they were striving for. And the fact that we need to honor that and we need to resurrect that in our own memories, in our own heritage, in our own legacies, I think that's what comes out of what we're doing now.
Yeah, you mentioned Blackdom. So I was saying that I hadn't heard of Dearfield before I was commissioned to do this piece, but as I was working on it, I was talking with other people about it, and then they were telling me all these other black towns, and 100% when they told me Blackdom, I thought that was a made-up name. I mean, I guess all names are made up, but like I was like, it's called Blackdom, and
It's like sci-fi.
This is New Mexico. It's like Blackdom, like Kingdom, and so I looked it up, and I was like, oh, this person wasn't lying to me, right? And then there was one in South Colorado called The Dry. The Dry. Another name that sounded like it was made up. I'll say a hallmark of Black American culture is flavor, is style, is swag. And I love that our towns had these cool ass names. Blackdom. Like I would like to live in Blackdom right now. You know what I'm saying?
Let's go.
Right. Let's take a trip to Blackdom. Yeah.
I was thinking about that looking at Charlie, and I appreciate so much that you focused on an individual, because that is what it is too. It's not just like a space that is nameless or doesn't have life within it, right? A beautiful, I mean, he was gorgeous and so contemporary looking, and what a trip to just see what his life was like and have you kind of take us through what that path would have been in that time and what exceptions had to be made by certain people to allow for his progress, quite frankly. So I love seeing that image, and it wasn't Blackdom, but it was Charlie, where I was like, man, so cool. Just like, stylish.
I want to second that. I think it was really great to see a specific person who lived in Dearfield and what their experience was. That was very enriching, because even when I was going to put together the comic, it was like sort of faceless denizens of this town, right? And I tried to create an emotional connection through how I wrote it. But I really loved seeing like a person and what their experience was to live in that town. You mentioned the style. If any of you make it to the Black American West Museum, there are soldiers, like young soldiers, teenagers, all black soldiers. It's a group of them, and they're all cool. They're leaning, they got their hats down like this, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, this is just something we've always had. It just made me, it made me feel so wonderful and proud.
Beautiful.
Okay, so both of you guys engaged in this work. So for me, like the museum world is relatively new. I've been able to contribute work to a few things. But I'll say in my youth, museums felt like an impenetrable institution, something that I couldn't connect with, that I wasn't welcome at, that I had no place in, that kind of thing. But the work that both of you are doing is what was lacking for me in my youth with museums. So it would be interesting if both of you would talk about what it is to make a museum sort of the people and accessible to different kinds of people.
I love that question. Thank you for seeing us.
Yes.
I could talk about it all day, because that's the life's work. Your idea and feeling around institutions in your person, like, that's who I'm always thinking about. So I'm the head of public engagement at the Walker Arts Center in Minneapolis. I oversee a team of over 80 people, and I'd say 60 of them are our front of house staff. And those are the folks who are processing your tickets, welcoming you into the gallery spaces, keeping you safe and the art safe. And like, it is incumbent upon every single person in my department, educators, of course, programmers, but the frontline team, that you feel welcome and included as soon as you are coming onto our campus, as soon as you are entering the front doors, that there's eye contact made, that there is warmth, that there is a sense that you are expected and welcome in that space. That's why I've also been so interested in public art over my career. Bring art to the people. If you don't feel comfortable coming into the museum, that's okay. I'll meet you where you are, maybe in your park this year, and then I'm going to want to see you inside the gallery someday. So there's always that hope and a sense of optimism around it. It's just like, how can you make the connection clear for people? One anecdote, and then I'll hand it over to you, Bob. But when I was at the Studio Museum, it sits on 125th Street, a very busy thoroughfare, lots of vendors, lots of activity, lots of life. And it's a glass front, and in the original building, there were wooden doors to the gallery, so you couldn't actually see the art, and that drove me nuts because I wanted people to see what was happening inside. They're building a new building. They've solved all of that, I'm sure. And there was one woman, Fatima, who ran a coffee cart outside of the museum on a daily basis, and I'd get my little coffee and my little egg sandwich every once in a while, and she'd stop to use the restroom sometimes, but never came inside. And one time I said, Fatima, have you ever seen the museum? Do you know what we do in here all day? I opened the doors and she said, oh my God. She had no idea. And like that's the work.
Yeah. I guess one of the things that we're beginning to do in a more sustained way with the Dearfield project is we're beginning to really we're saying, oh, this thing is going to happen. And it's, we didn't, 10 years ago, we had no idea that it would be moving so fast. But one of the things we're thinking about now is how do we present the site, how do we utilize the town site in particular to teach people, to teach youth. We've already had school groups coming out, and we have an annual conference. And a few years ago, we had a conference where there was a group in Castle Rock. It was a fifth grade class, and their teacher had picked Dearfield as one of their subjects. And so the children were developing all kinds of scenarios and plays and things and lessons in the school. And that went on for 3 or 4 years, and finally the teacher had moved on and went to another school, and that program, it languished. But those kids came out to Dearfield several times, and they also made a presentation at one of our conferences, and that was really exciting. We have teachers groups coming out doing classes at the University of Northern Colorado that are focusing on Dearfield, and so these are things that are going to get wrapped into the final product. But there's another thing that really excites me, and that is that there were so many things that made up the rich fabric of life of Dearfield, and one of those was music. It was extremely important, and music was in the church. People they were playing. There was a piano that was given to the Presbyterian Union Presbyterian Church in Dearfield by O.T. Jackson's wife to be able to use in that, and they seconded it and used it in the dance hall. And we had fiddler, with the blacksmith was a fiddler, and his brother-in-law was a mandolin player, and there were weekly dances on weekends and things like this going on. And then there's something else that is I'm still getting my hands into, trying my mind into. There was a gentleman by the name of George Morrison. I don't know if you've ever heard of George Morrison. George Morrison was he wrote music in the early 20th century. He gave concerts at Dearfield with his jazz orchestra, and they would have all kinds of events during the summertime where people from Dearfield and from Denver and all would come in there, and they would have these big picnics and they would have these performances. George Morrison and the jazz band in 1920 toured Europe. They played before the royal family, and they were Columbia Records back then was in existence they were the first African American musical group to record records with Columbia, and that's all associated with Dearfield. So there's a lot of rich threads that are extending out in directions we'd never thought about before.
I hope we're all taking notes. That's amazing.
When's the projected open of the Dearfield Museum?
Well, we're probably looking within 5 years.
Okay.
It's going to take that much time to get the buildings finished, and to be able to go through the congressional approval process and everything. Because once the Park Service makes its determination in about 2 years, 2.5 years, then it goes to Congress. Our congressional sponsors, we have both senators are sponsors of these Dearfield Study Act, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 representatives from the House of Representatives that are co-sponsors now, and then they have to run it through Congress in both the Senate and the House. And then we have to negotiate with the National Park Service, the museum does, because it's a partnership. It's kind of cool.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, if there's anything we know, is that Congress and the Senate are very efficient. So it's going to happen really quickly. So we're saying 5 years about that we're thinking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's shoot for 5 years.
Yeah, you guys mark it on your calendars.
So you want to put that on your calendar.
Okay, so here's what's going to happen. This is the point where you get to ask questions. I think we're recording, so what I'm going to do are there going to be microphones for the people asking questions? Oh, yes. Okay, good. So there'll be someone with a microphone. Please raise your hand. Now, again, I encourage you to think about your question, distill it down to one sentence, and then ask that question. That way we make sure we have room for everyone and that there's no confusion and also no long statements. All right, so who has a question? Hands up, please. We have a question right here.
Do you have a microphone? Yeah.
Hi, just wondering if we can actually go there today. I know it's not open to the public, but if we drive up there, what are we going to see, or can we see anything?
Well, you can see what's standing out there right now. What you see are some fallen buildings, and it's right immediately off of US 34. I'd guess maybe 50 feet off the middle of the highway. It's pretty close. Actually, the road that US 34 used to be the Greeley branch of the Lincoln Highway. I don't know if anybody knows what the Lincoln Highway was. Lincoln Highway was the first interstate highway. It went from coast to coast. And it was built between about 1906 and about 1915. And Greeley didn't get it because it went through Nebraska and Wyoming, but Colorado didn't get it. And so what they did is they built 2 branches. One of the branches came down from Nebraska along the South Platte River and ran right past Dearfield, which is one of the reasons that O.T. Jackson put Dearfield where it was, because he knew there was going to be a fancy road going right by there. And there's an interesting story about the official opening of the Greeley branch of the Lincoln Highway, is that they combined it with the fair, and they had the governor there. They had one of our senators. They had a whole bunch of representatives and judges and Supreme Court judges and things that were at the event to open that branch of the highway, and it was held in Dearfield, which is really. Wow, I mean, that's a big deal. And the one thing that I think is really kind of cool about that story is that they reported a flyover of biplanes. This was before World War I, or right at the edge of World War I. And so they had these biplanes flying over, like you do in parades and things. And that was kind of cool.
Thank you for your question.
When did the last resident leave Dearfield? And are there any living people still who lived in Dearfield at any time?
Oh, that's a tough one. So the last living original resident of Dearfield died in 1951, and his name was Squire Brockman, and he was the fiddler and the blacksmith. When I say blacksmith, he was an auto mechanic and everything. The blacksmith shop, we had stabilized it. We thought we were going to be able to restore it, and we had this big wind that came and flattened it. We're still going to put it back up again, I swear. It's going to be the coolest place. And so he was the last one out there. Dearfield, the founder of Dearfield died in 1948, O.T. Jackson. And so those were the last two original residents. O.T. Jackson's niece, who came to Dearfield off and on since she was a teenager, came to Dearfield in 1941 or something like this, to take care of her elderly aunt and uncle, O.T. Jackson being her uncle. And she inherited the Jackson house, their home there, and she lived out there until 1973 when she passed away. So I guess in a sense that maybe 73 would be the most recent connection. The area has some housing developments today, and other people live out there with no connection. Descendants, yeah, we have a few descendants of Dearfield residents identified. We've contacted them. We're trying to do oral histories on them. All of the things we can to preserve as much as we possibly can, but that effort is still minimal. A lot of people scattered. One of the things that happened in the 30s is that we had a diaspora from the West and the Midwest. A lot of people moved all over the country, and so people moved out of Dearfield. A lot of them went to California. It's kind of interesting, and we're still trying to track some of those folks down.
That's interesting. I was going to say, thank you for that question. That was great. Me and Amanda got Philly in common because I used to be there in the summers as a kid because my dad was a journalist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And there's a way for me, growing up in the South, that even though Black Cowboys were sort of a new idea, certainly cowboy was a Southern idea to me. So this idea of first of all, cowboys existing in cities, but then Black cowboys existing in cities like Philly is really significant and stands out to me. And I want to hear a little more about like your experience in that urban setting, perceiving these Black cowboys, like what it meant to you, what just talk about it.
Sure, and I forgot to mention Dina Lawson, the Black Background at Night, the two cowboys. That's in Georgia. So you're in there too. You should look deeper next time. I wasn't even aware of the Fletcher Street Riding Club that Mohammed Barisa documented in film and in that installation that I showed. So it wasn't like a high touch kind of relationship. It was really just like seeing that it was a possibility. But I think I like tucked it away in a drawer, and fast forward to that moment, like it was just like, nope, you gotta follow this. Like you have to share that with other people. So it wasn't even so much it was a tangible presence. I think it wasn't until later, like, because I'm a city girl. I grew up in Philadelphia. I've lived in New York City. I've lived in Los Angeles. I've lived in San Francisco. I've seen the most Black cowboys in New York City, actually. There's the African American Day Parade in Harlem every September. And, Black folks riding horses all day. But it was nice to be able to kind of call back a very formative memory that's close to home, quite literally, and to keep seeking it elsewhere.
In Amanda's presentation, she mentioned that the first Black cowboy looked like Melvin Van Peebles. If you're not familiar with Melvin Van Peebles, he was a Black filmmaker, musician, multi-hyphenate. There's a documentary on him called How to Enjoy Your Watermelon in White Company. And it's really great, so it's worth checking out. He was a brilliant man. He died last year, I think. Yeah. Who else has a question? Yes. Microphone's coming your way.
Hi, thank you guys for this wonderful presentation. My question is, are there any, any of you have any like anecdotes of, through your research, of the dark history behind Black Cowboys? Maybe even in the East, you know, you hear about all these terrible things that have happened to people out West. What happened out East, right? And just like the Marlboro Man, it's good to get behind the picture and behind the celebration and see the real history, right? In some of those darker places.
I want to make sure we got it all because we couldn't hear it that well.
Oh, sorry.
So, but the question was, in our research, what experience do we have with some of the darker stories regarding Black Cowboys and
yes,
history?
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I'll say for myself, one, I grew up in Atlanta. I've had enough dark history.
Yep.
I've been drowned in slavery narratives. I'm glad that they exist in terms of telling the story.
The truth.
But also, I don't need to see anymore. Those are pretty much for white people as far as I'm concerned. I already know that stuff, you know. But that said, I did do a Nat Love story for the Denver Art Museum, which it was another comics on a touchscreen. It's on the top floor in the Martin building. I'm telling you that because if you start at the bottom floor, you'll never make it to my thing. So you need to start at the top and work your way down. But Nat Love's story was really interesting to me because he was 11 when slavery ended, and he had this real perspective on. He didn't bring this out in his autobiography. I read his autobiography and then distilled it down to a comic. But one of the things that I noticed was that horses always represented freedom for him. So even during slavery, when he got to ride and break horses, those were like the most free and excited and connected times of his life. And you know, he was maybe 13 or 14 when he left home and moved out west to become a cowboy. And his entire story is escaping the oppression of the South. I will say that there are points where he embraced some of the racism that he got, I'm going to say that he got from other cowboys, and turned it towards like Native communities and Latino communities. So that stuff, you know, it shows sort of the damaging nature of oppression, that when you can escape it just a little bit, you'll still put your foot on somebody else's neck, you know. But yeah, that's what I have to say about it. What do you guys have to say?
Well, speaking of Native Americans, Native communities, there has always been, very early on, even pre-Civil War, a lot of strong relationships between Native American tribes and African Americans. A lot of escaped slaves from the South ended up, you know, being adopted into Western tribes. I know that the Cherokee accepted a lot of African Americans into their communities. And as a matter of fact, the gentleman that I was talking about, Charlie Rothwell, his father was a full-blood Cherokee. And his mother married him in Oklahoma, and then they came up here to Denver and lived in Denver for a while before his father was an alcoholic, and his mother, who was a very strong woman, just divorced him and said, "The heck with you." Another story that I found recently was, I don't know if anyone has heard the name Nicodemus. Nicodemus is another one of those colonies. And Nicodemus was a fairly early one. It was the early 1870s that it was established in northwestern Kansas. And in the early days of Nicodemus, they had some pretty severe winters the first 2 or 3 years. And Osage Indians came down and helped them live through the winter by giving them buffalo meat. So there are a lot of positive stories as well.
Yeah, I think that idea and reality of kinship as well, and survival and banding together, though complicated, right? These interactions over time And I think I go back to something that you noted when you were doing the micro interview with Bob, is just how noticeably it didn't end poorly in Dearfield. It was literally because of natural causes and climate change, that this community faded out. So in my mind, I was thinking about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where that was dismantled with violence intentionally by white people. So I think that question around darker stories, what I hope is that you will research more stories as a result of tonight, that you all are hearing names and thinking about other possibilities and seek things out for yourselves as well.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think I would say the stories that don't end in a dark way are the exception to the rule. There's so many more. But thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Who else has a question? We got time for maybe one or two more. All right, microphone's coming your way. It's so everyone else can hear you.
Okay. I like what you said, and it kind of relates to maybe a question I was going to ask. So, I've been living abroad 38 years, just moved to Denver, Colorado. You can't imagine the shock.
Welcome.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. Born in Midland, Texas, and I'm here now. So, really into the show, saw it. It's fabulous. I've seen it 3 times, And, but if I could ask each one of you a question, like, what is the takeaway you want me to relate into the Denver and Colorado community? Like, besides see the show, if there's one salient thought you had, well, it's not just that there were Black Cowboys, it goes way deeper than that. So if you had, each of you, one thing to say, what would you say?
Well, I'm cheating here. I would say not only go see the show, but go see the Museum of the Black American West as part of your exploration of this, because that history has been captured by people caring for these histories, and it's right here. So you as a newcomer, bring your friends, support the smaller organizations who are caring for these histories.
Yeah, I really think that one of the perspectives that we really need to wrap our brains around are the untold stories, the undocumented past. Undocumented in the sense that it's not taught in the schools, or it doesn't appear in most museums or libraries or anything like this. That these stories really need to be told, and they need to be told with great urgency in this country, because we're tearing ourselves apart once again, and these are things that bind us together, and we really do need to pay attention.
Props to both of you on that. Okay, I'll say mine. So much of American oppression has been about stripping oppressed people of their humanity. Since we're specifically speaking about Black people now, stripping Black people of their humanity, reducing us down to some simple, one-dimensional picture, even up to present-day top 40 rap music. Before rap music became like mainstream and popular, it represented a whole bunch of stuff. There was revolutionaries, there was party rap, there were all kinds of different things. But this sort of obsession with Black violence does not come from Black people. It is what is packaged and sold and bought. And so for me, as an artist, as a Black artist specifically, one of the most important things is to communicate the humanity of Black people. And if you read my Dearfield story, the part of the reason that I centered it on the relationship between a father and son is because, one, I wanted to homage what my father has contributed to my life, but more importantly, I wanted to show Black vulnerability and Black humanity. So that's the number one message for me. Thank you for that question. Okay, guys, I think we're pretty much at our time. Can you give Amanda and Bob another round of applause?
And Alan.
All right. Thank you, guys. And
Thank
also, you did a great job cheering. I'm proud of you all. I'm proud of every one of you. I hope you all come to Blackdom. You coming to Blackdom with me?